Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? For 26 centuries, that sentence has meant comfort. It became a spiritual, a hymn, a line carved on the inside of grief. But the prophet who wrote it did not mean it as comfort. He meant it as despair. He was pointing at the most valuable medicine in his world, a cure so famous that empires would one day go to war over the shrub that made it, and asking why, with all of it within arm's reach, the wound would not close. This is the story of that medicine, what it was worth. And why the oldest question ever asked about it is the one we still cannot answer. The Hebrew word is sori. Most Bibles render it balm, and for most of history, people assumed they knew exactly what plant it named. The legendary Balm of Judea, a sap once weighed against silver. But pull on that thread, and the whole thing comes loose. The scholars who first translated the word were already unsure what it was. The geography of the Bible quietly contradicts the geography of the famous plant. And the deeper you dig, the less certain the most certain medicine in Scripture becomes. So we are going to do three things: follow the balm from a caravan in Genesis to a battlefield in Roman Judea, where it really was the single most precious crop on earth. Ask the honest question of what it actually was and find that nobody knows. And then watch a 1,000-year-old seed, pulled from a desert cave, sprout in a laboratory and reopen the entire mystery. The word arrives early, and it arrives as cargo. In Genesis, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders comes up out of Gilead, their camels loaded with gum, balm, and myrrh, carrying it all down to the markets of Egypt. It is an ordinary commercial detail, the kind of thing the text barely pauses on. Except that this is the caravan that buys Joseph from his brothers and carries him into slavery. The balm is in the room at the hinge of the whole story. A few chapters later, when the famine bites and the brothers must go back to Egypt to beg for grain, their father tells them to bring a gift from the best of the land: a little balm, a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, almonds. The tsori is named first. It was the kind of thing you offered a king. By the time of the prophets, the balm has become a word for healing itself. Ezekiel, cataloging the trade of the great port of Tyre, lists it among the exports of Judah, alongside wheat and honey and oil. Proof it was a real commodity moving through real warehouses, not a poet's flourish. But it is Jeremiah who fixes the phrase in the language forever. Watching his nation slide toward catastrophe, he cries out, "Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of my people not been restored?" Read that carefully, because almost everyone reads it wrong. It sounds like a complaint that the medicine has run out. It is the opposite. The balm is there. The physicians are there. The standard reading among commentators is unanimous. The tragedy is not a shortage. The tragedy is that the most famous cure on earth is sitting on the shelf, and the wound it is meant to close is not the kind a balm can reach. Jeremiah picked this medicine out of everything he could have named precisely because it was the one that should have worked. And he kept reaching for it. When he mocks a defeated Egypt, he tells her to go up to Gilead and take balm. In vain, he says, for there is no healing for you. When he foresees the fall of Babylon, he says, take balm for her pain. Perhaps she may be healed. Over and over, the same plant, invoked as the standard of last resort, the cure you turn to when nothing else is left. So set the metaphor down for a moment and ask the literal question. What was it? What plant, what resin sat behind a reputation that large? Here the fog of Scripture burns off, and the balm walks straight into the blinding light of Roman history. Because by the 1st century, the world had lost its mind over a small, ugly shrub growing in 2 walled gardens by the Dead Sea. The Romans called the sap opobalsamum. It was tapped exactly the way frankincense and myrrh are tapped, by scoring the bark and letting the plant bleed its precious tears. and for a few centuries it was, pound for pound, the most valuable agricultural product in the entire empire. We are not guessing at this. We have the receipt, and it was written by Pliny the Elder. Pliny says the balsam was granted by nature to Judea alone, uniterarum Judaeae concessum, and that the purest tear of it sold for twice its weight in silver. Twice its weight in silver. Then he tells a story that should stop you. During the great Jewish revolt against Rome, as the country burned, the Jews tried to destroy the balsam plants rather than let them fall into Roman hands, and the Romans fought to save them. In Pliny's own astonished phrase, there were pitched battles in defense of a shrub. Dimicetum pro frutice est. Men died over a hedge. And when the war ended and Jerusalem fell, the conquerors did something extraordinary with the plant. They paraded it. When Vespasian and Titus held their triumph through the streets of Rome, the captured balsam shrubs were carried in the procession. Living trophies marched past the crowds like prisoners of war. The plant itself was expropriated into the imperial treasury and grown as the personal property of the emperor. You did not just conquer Judea, you conquered its garden. The historian Josephus fills in the rest, and you can feel him enjoying it. He says the balsam was not even native, that the Queen of Sheba had carried the first root to King Solomon as a gift, and the country had grown it ever since. We should be careful there. That is a Josephan tradition, a lovely origin story with no archaeology behind it, the kind of pedigree a lucrative crop tends to acquire. But the next part is sober history. When Mark Antony wanted to lavish a gift on Cleopatra, he did not hand her gold. He carved off the balsam groves of Jericho and gave her the most profitable real estate in the Near East. And Herod the Great, king of the Jews, was reduced to the humiliation of leasing his own gardens back from the Queen of Egypt at ruinous rent. A crop that empires traded like provinces was, naturally, a secret worth killing for. Centuries later, in the floor of a synagogue at Ein Gedi, one of the two towns that grew the balsam, archaeologists found a mosaic inscription, a long communal curse written in Aramaic. It calls down heaven on anyone who slanders his neighbor, anyone who steals, and anyone who reveals the secret of the town to the Gentiles. The inscription never says what the secret was, but Ein Gedi had exactly one secret the world wanted, and the leading interpretation is that the curse was guarding the formula, how to process the raw sap into the finished, fabulously expensive perfume and medicine. We cannot prove that reading. But the town had only one thing worth a curse, and the industry was real, not legendary. South of Ein Gedi, at an oasis called En Bokek, excavators uncovered a Roman-era workshop, a perfumer's laboratory, with grinding installations and specialized double boiler furnaces designed to steep oils and aromatics without scorching them. Industrial equipment built to imperial scale for a plant the size of a garden hedge. This was the cure Jeremiah said could not heal his people. Not a metaphor, but the most expensive substance grown anywhere on earth. Which brings us to the question this whole video has been circling, the one that should be simple and is not. We have a famous healing balm in the Hebrew Bible. We have a famous healing plant in Roman Judea. Surely they are the same thing. They might not be. Start with the translators, because they got there first. When Jewish scholars in Alexandria rendered the Hebrew Bible into Greek 3 centuries before Christ, they came to the word sori, and they did not reach for balsamon, the specific, glamorous Greek name for the Judean balsam they absolutely knew about. They reached for retin, generic resin, pine tar, the pedestrian, catch-all word for any sticky stuff that bleeds from a tree. When Jerome translated it into Latin, he did the same. Resina, just resin. If the balm of the Bible had obviously been the most famous luxury plant in their world, these translators, living in an empire drunk on the spice trade, would have said so. They didn't. They hedged. Even the oldest dictionaries hedge, defining tsori with a careful shrug. A kind of balsam, a kind of resin, source uncertain. Then there is the problem of the map. The Bible plants the balm firmly in Gilead, the highlands east of the Jordan, a country of cool, wooded, rocky hills. But the famous Roman balsam, the Commiphora shrub, is a tropical plant. It is frost-tender. It cannot survive a highland winter. It grows only in the searing, below sea-level furnace of the Dead Sea Basin, at Jericho and Ein Gedi, on the western side of the Jordan, nowhere near Gilead. The plant that made the Romans rich could not have grown in the place the Bible keeps naming. Balm of Gilead turns out to be a proverb, not an address. So a serious school of botanists, including the great scholar of biblical plants, Michael Zohari, argues that the original tsori was never the tropical balsam at all. It was something humbler and local, the resin of the mastic or the terebinth, a pistacea, a tree that actually grows in the hills of Gilead and really was tapped for a medicinal aromatic gum. In this reading, the ancient prestige name tsori was simply transplanted centuries later onto the exotic and far more profitable Dead Sea balsam, the way a famous old brand gets stamped on a flashy new product. The balm of history is the Commiphora. The balm of Jeremiah may have been a mastic tree. If you find that unsatisfying, if you want a clean answer, I understand. But the honest state of the question is that we do not have one, and the people who insist they do are usually selling something. Which is exactly why what happened next, in a greenhouse in the Israeli desert, is so strange. Before the greenhouse, though, we have to ask whether any of this was real medicine or just expensive smell. Because a reputation for healing is cheap, and the ancient world handed it out freely, the answer is that the balsam really was a drug, by the standards of its time, and the best physicians of antiquity treated it as one. Dioscorides, whose pharmacology was the medical authority for 1,500 years, calls the balsam very nearly a panacea. He says it clears the sight and sharpens failing vision. He says it soothes coughs and the troubles of the lungs, that it counteracts the bites of venomous creatures, that it was an ingredient in the great compound antidotes against poison. The physicians even graded it: the pure, dripped sap most precious, then the boiled wood, then the seed. And Pliny records the tests an honest merchant used to catch a fake, because a substance that valuable was forged constantly. This was a serious pharmaceutical, sold at the very top of the market. So the obvious modern question is the one this channel always asks: was any of it true? When you put the balm of Gilead under a microscope, does the legend survive contact with the laboratory? Partly. And the honesty about which part is where this gets interesting. The plant still exists, Commiphora gileadensis, the Mecca balsam, and over the last 15 years, a handful of scientists, several of them working with specimens regrown at Ein Gedi, have run it through the instruments. The chemistry is real and specific, an essential oil rich in compounds like sabinene and terpinene, chemically distinct from its cousins myrrh and frankincense. And the biology is not nothing. In a 2012 study from Israel's Ben Gurion University, a compound isolated from the balm, beta-caryophyllene, selectively triggered programmed death in tumor cells in a dish while leaving healthy cells alone. Other teams have found the sap-killing skin cancer cells, the resin closing wounds in mice, the extract knocking back staphylococcus, and even drug-resistant bacteria. Read the abstracts, and it sounds like vindication. The balm of Gilead, confirmed at last. Now read them more carefully, which is the whole job. Every one of those results is preclinical. They happen in glassware and in mice, cells in a dish, a wound on a laboratory animal. Not one of them is a clinical trial in a human being. And when you go looking for that trial, when you search the registries of every study ever run on this plant, for any disease, anywhere in the world, you find nothing. Zero. The balm of Gilead is one of the most written about plants in the history of medicine, and it has never once been tested in a controlled trial on a single living patient. So here is the sentence a pharmacologist would actually sign, and it is worth saying slowly. Laboratory studies show that compounds from Commiphora gileadensis can kill tumor cells in culture, fight bacteria in a dish, and help heal wounds in mice. No human trial has ever been conducted. The bioactivity is real. The proof everyone assumes is there. The proof that it heals a person is not. The balm could clean a wound and clear an eye. Whether it does anything the legend promised in a human body is a question modern science has, astonishingly, never gotten around to asking. And then there is the seed. In the 1980s, in a cave in the Judean desert, archaeologists found a single, perfectly preserved seed. It sat in storage for decades. When it was finally radiocarbon dated, the result came back somewhere between the years 9993 and 1202, a seed that had been dormant for roughly 1,000 years. In 2010, a research team led by Dr. Sarah Salin decided to try the impossible and planted it. 5 weeks later, it sprouted. They nicknamed the seedling Sheba, and over the next 14 years, it grew into a tree more than 3 meters tall. A living thing germinated from a seed that had last seen sunlight before the Crusades. And when they sequenced its DNA, the mystery cracked open all over again. Sheba is a Commiphora, the right family, the right genus for the Balm of Gilead. But it is not Commiphora gileadensis. It is genetically distinct from the famous perfume balsam, distinct from every species the team could sample, a kind of plant the modern world had simply lost. And when they analyzed its chemistry, they found something that pointed straight back at Jeremiah. Sheba has almost no fragrance. What it has instead is an abundance of medicinal compounds, including a class of molecules never described before. It is not a perfume plant. It is a medicine plant, which is why the researchers, with appropriate caution, floated an extraordinary idea. Look again at the Bible. Look at how it talks about Sori. It praises the balm's value and its healing power over and over, and it never once praises its smell. The famous Roman balsam was prized above all for its fragrance, but the biblical balm is only ever a medicine. A non-fragrant, intensely medicinal native Commiphora fits the words of Scripture better than the perfume the empires fought over ever did. Sheba, grown from a 1,000-year-old seed, might be a closer relative of the true Balm of Gilead than the plant we have spent 2,000 years assuming was the answer. If you'd like to keep sitting with histories like this, where the science and the Scripture turn out to be stranger and more honest than the legend, subscribe and stay a while, because the strangest part is where it leaves us. We have spent 2,000 years confirming the first half of Jeremiah's question and quietly proving the second. The balm was real. The treasure was real. The bioactivity is real, glowing faintly in a dish under a microscope. And the deep wound the prophet was actually asking about, the grief of a people, the failure of a nation, the things that no resin closes, is exactly as far beyond the reach of medicine now as it was the day he wrote the line. We have learned to grow the balm again from a seed older than the question. We still cannot answer it. Is there no balm in Gilead? There is. There always was. It was never the kind of wound a balm could heal.